All right, welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to begin a new module that is going to discuss control statements, iteration, and vectorized operations. And these are all really fundamental tools used in programming in any language. Things like if-else statements and for loops. These are pretty fundamental programming tools. We'll learn how to implement them in R, but whatever skills you learn, you should be able to transfer over to other languages that have very similar commands with very similar syntax. So we'll start this module by loading some packages that we'll use later on in this module. We actually won't use any of them specifically in this video, but please run these two code cells. It's going to install two packages, Permute and Microbench, that we'll use later in this module, and run this second code cell, which is going to load those packages as well as the core tidyverse packages. We'll mainly need to use ggplot2 for some plots is all. So a control statement is code that controls what is executed later in the program. And the most well-known examples would be if-else statements and switch statements. So we'll start thinking about if-else statements, and we'll take a look at some in this video right now. So the basic form of an if statement in R is that it begins with if, and then in rounded parentheses, you enter some logical test, some condition, and then a space. And then after that space, you have a set of open curly braces where you enter what is going to occur when that logical test returns a true value. And that's it. That's all you really need. You don't need to have an else statement, though almost always the if statement includes an else statement. So the else statement, we begin with else and then a space, and then another set of curly braces where we enter what action is going to be performed if the logical condition returns a false value. And we typically enter things using this sort of syntax and this sort of spacing in the code where we indent the actions, the true action and the false action, and break up and use line breaks as well, as we've done here. This just helps the readability of the code, though you could enter this if statement and this else statement all on the same line if you wanted to. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend trying to break this up as we've done up here to make your code easier to read. Okay, so let's take a look at an example to get things going. So the example that we're going to take a look at is an if statement to check whether a birth year would qualify that person as a millennial, being in the millennial generation. So the millennial generation is from 1981 to 1996. So let me first just unpack this if statement. So this is an if statement without an else. I just told you not to do that, and we'll see why. So what I can do here is my condition is if the year, the value of year is bigger than or equal to 1981, less than or equal to 1996, then we go ahead and return, we set an object that we're going to name generation, and we assign the character string millennial to that object generation. So if the year falls between 81 and 96, then this object generation is going to get assigned the character string millennial. So here, let me input a year such as 1990, first of all. And then I'm going to run this code cell, and we don't see any output generated here. And that's because we've assigned millennial to this object generation, but we didn't ask to see what is inside of generation displayed on screen. So if I run this next code cell that just says print generation on the screen, now I can see that millennial was assigned to generation. So since this condition was true for our value of year, this action was executed, and we have stored millennial in generation. If I change the year to say 2000 and I run this if statement again, right, this is now going to return a false because 2000 is bigger than 1996. So there is no else command here. There is no action that is defined what to do when this is false. So nothing is done. So I set year to 2000. I run this if statement. The result is false. So nothing happened. But now if I run this code cell to see what is stored in generation, we still have the output millennial, which has been assigned to generation because that was done when I ran this code cell the first time with year being 1990. I changed year to 2000. I ran this again. Nothing was done. So millennial is still being stored in generation, although this year does not correspond to a millennial. So that is problematic. And that's exactly why it is good practice to have an else command along with the if statement. So here we've added an else command and an else statement to this, which tells us what to do when the result of this condition is false. So let's set, say, year equal to 1980, which is not a millennial. And let me run this if else command. And now what's going to happen is it's going to say this condition is false. So I'm not going to do this action, but now I do have an action to do. And that is I'm going to change possibly whatever is stored in generation. And now I'm going to store the character string not a millennial to generation. So if year is 1980, this is not a millennial. It doesn't seem, I don't see any output printed to the screen at this point because I haven't asked to see it. But this should now assign not a millennial to generation because, again, this condition was false. And we can check to make sure that has happened by running this code cell to see what is stored in generation. And indeed, millennial, not a millennial, is now being stored in generation. And when I change this back to 1990 and run this, this runs the true action, which is assigns millennial to generation. So now it's updating the output accordingly, whether that is true or false with different character strings. And before we stop this video, I just want to mention that often, more often than not, when we're running an if-else statement, we want to execute multiple actions depending on whether the statement is true or false, not just a single action. So in this if-else statement, we just did one thing, is we assigned something to generation. But oftentimes you run a sequence of actions. In this case, we can think about two different actions. One that's going to assign a character string to generation, and another which is going to assign a numeric to some object that we call diff. And I don't know why I called it diff, but it's going to do something different depending on whether the condition is true or false. If the condition is true, it's going to take whatever the value of year is and add 10,000. If the condition is false, it's going to take whatever the value of the year is and add 20,000. So if I have a year which is equal to 2,000 and I run this if else statement, this condition is false. So it's going to come down to the false action, and it's going to store not a millennial to generation. It's going to add 20,000 to the year. So this diff object is now going to have the value 22,000. I'm going to run this. I won't see any output displayed, but I can check to see what has been stored in generation and diff to make sure that both of those actions were run, and that looks right. And I can change this to another year like 1990, run this command again, and then double check that what should now be output is generation should be millennial, and the year should be 11,990. We're going to add 10,000 to 1990, and that seems to be working as we expected. So in the next video, we'll continue with this generation example, but see how we can use the else if condition in order to work in other generations into this condition. Thanks, everyone.